Well, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening from wherever in the world you may be joining us. My name is Jeroen de Wolf. I am the director of the UC Berkeley Institute of European Studies. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's event on foreign policy and the new German government, an event that is inevitably and sadly marked by the war in Ukraine, but an event also where we intend to discuss other international challenges that the new German government is currently facing. This event is organized in cooperation with our colleagues from the German Historical Institute Washington and its Pacific office here on the Berkeley campus. And it will be moderated by my colleague Akasemi Newsome, the Associate Director of our Institute of European Studies, as well as Sören Urbanksy, Head of the GHI Pacific Office here in Berkeley. Allow me then to welcome today's panelists, and I start with Sudha David-Wilp, who's a Senior Transatlantic Fellow and Deputy Director of the Berlin Office of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Before moving to Berlin in 2011, she was the Director of International Programs at the US Association of Former Members of Congress in Washington, D.C. for nearly 8 years. She received her bachelor's degree from Johns Hopkins University and a master's in international relations from Columbia University. I also welcome to today's program Oliver Schramm, who since 2021 is the Consul General of Germany to Northern California, Oregon, Washington State, Alaska, Hawaii, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and American Samoa. From 2017 to 2021, he served as Minister for Economic and Global Affairs at the German Embassy in London. From 2014 to 2017, he served at the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Berlin. His various other roles within the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs have stationed him in Seoul, Boston, Washington, D.C., Rome, Lima, and London. Oliver Schramm studied at Harvard and received an MBA from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. And lastly, I welcome to the program Charles M. Huber, who served as a member of the German Bundestag for the Christian Democratic Union from 2013 to 2017. He was one of the first 2 Afro-German Bundestag members to ever be elected. Huber served as the chairman of the Parliamentary Friendship Group for Relations with West and Central Africa, and as a member of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. Prior to entering politics, Huber was best known in Germany for playing Henry Johnson in the famous German crime series Der Alte. He currently lives in Senegal, where he serves as special advisor to the president Macky Sall, and where in 2002, he founded the organization Africa Direct, which supports young people, the poor, and artists in Senegal. In 2005, Charles M. Huber published an autobiography entitled A Bavarian in Senegal, My Life Between Two Worlds. So welcome to the 3 of you, and thank you so much for being with us here today. The way we will organize the event is that our moderators, they prepared a number of questions for our discussant, but all of you in the audience are also invited to participate yourself in the discussion. Whenever you have a question for our moderators, please post your question in the chat room, and our moderators will then try to include your question in the conversation with today's guests. So let me then pass it on to my dear colleague, Akasemi Newsome. Akasemi, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jeroen. Sören, you may have the first question.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jeroen, for the kind words of introduction, and also to our guests for joining us today. Let me start right away. The logic of military deterrence has never penetrated beyond small foreign policy circles and the center-right in post-war Germany. After Russia invaded Ukraine, Chancellor Scholz announced a dramatic shift or Zeitenwende in defense posture and spending. He committed to investing at least 2% of the GDP in defense matters. Additionally, for the 2002 budget, the government has set up a 100 billion special fund for immediate investments in military capacity. Such a shift could open a path to a completely different European security order. How would you, Consul General Schramm, describe Germany's role within this new European security cooperation? What are its potential consequences for a transatlantic security cooperation? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Jerome, for the kind introduction. Hi, Akasemi, and hi, Sören. It's great to see you. And I wanted also to thank the Institute for European Studies and the German Historical Institute for having me this morning. As I said in our introductory chat, what exciting times we are looking at the moment, and how many one might even call historic moments we are witnessing, albeit on a very in a very dramatic and tragic situation. We are faced with this war of aggression that President Putin is waging in Ukraine. Well, Sören, you mentioned some of the key elements that were announced by Chancellor Olaf Scholz when he spoke in a special session of the Bundestag on February 27, just 3 days after the war, the invasion of Ukraine started, and was also followed up by a resolution of the Bundestag, basically an all-party resolution borne by all the major parties in the Bundestag, I think with one exception, and underlining and supporting what he had to come up with. And I think what this dramatic situation and crisis needs and demands of the German government, and the new German government stood up to the plate and brought up dramatic changes, is, I think, most of all, a dramatic shift in our foreign policy and security policy posture. So if you just remember the 5 main points he made, one is, of course, first point, support of Ukraine, meaning we change our weapons export policy. So previously the German government had as an iron rule, and that was true for the previous government as well, and many others before, not to export weapons and arms into areas of conflicts. So that is something that has undergone a major shift. Then in terms of sanctions, Germany, together with its European partners and its partners in G7, has agreed on various packages of sanctions that have gone much further than any other sanctions in the past, including SWIFT, but also including, and that of course is a matter for transatlantic relations, halting the Nord Stream 2 project in its tracks, and possibly looking at the other pipeline. We have Nord Stream 1, but that's not decided yet. Thirdly, we have a new build-up, and Sören, you mentioned that when you mentioned the special fund that's been set up, a special build-up of German armed forces in different theaters, so to speak, in Eastern Europe. We're leading the battle group in Lithuania, air policing in Romania, setting up a new NATO group in Slovakia. Our Navy is now deployed in the North Sea, the Baltic Sea, the Mediterranean, and we are also granting more anti-aircraft missile protection in Eastern Europe. So there's a big deployment, a big shift, but as you mentioned, that also, of course, needs more equipment. That means more money, more funding, and that's been set aside it's been announced that 100 billion will be set aside as a special fund, and Chancellor Scholz has urged also the parliamentarians to consider including the special fund into the basic law of Germany, the Grundgesetz. Of course, today you might have seen the news that the 2022 budget has been agreed within the cabinet. Now it has to be put before Parliament for consideration, and this includes, of course, the 100 billion But Finance Minister Lindner has made it clear that there might be, in the weeks to come, a new additional budget to come, because it's extremely hard now in these days to predict what other necessities are there, what other funds will be needed, also with a view to energy prices and global supply chains, making probably the need for more funds necessary. Fourth point, you mentioned also the defense spending. Apart from the 100 billion, more than 2% of our GDP will be spent. So making true on the promise that a previous government had given at a NATO summit in Wales, to step up to the plate. And of course, in terms of armament, you've seen the recent headlines: F-35 fighters, a sped up development of a Eurofighter. On the Eurodrone contract has been signed, and the purchase of Heron drones from Israel is also on the table. And then, of course, most importantly, as a last point, energy price. So I mentioned already Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2, but of course the regular program that we had to make Germany carbon neutral has been shifted to 2045. And the buildup of renewable energies to get out of coal and gas as quickly as possible. We've announced to build liquid gas terminals, LNG terminals, also to become less dependent on certain sources or supplies of energy, and in order to kind of buffer off what is very likely to come as a price hike, which is already happening. The German government has today also announced a number of measures to alleviate that for the German customers, the German public, especially in the field of tax allowance, heating subsidiaries for family tax relief measures, commuter tax allowance was raised, etc. So for the transatlantic relations, I think that is something that at least the past administrations, and I wouldn't just reduce that to the Trump administration, have asked Germany to do, become more assertive in a positive way and more visible as a partner in defense. And of course, we all know that the Nord Stream projects have always found great interest in Congress. So in a way, I think this is also serving up to the transatlantic relations, and what President Biden and Chancellor Scholz have spoken about and announced when Scholz came to visit for his first visit to Washington in early February. I'll leave it at that at the moment.
Thank you so much, Oliver. And now my question I'd like to direct to Sudha. As you know, US President Biden is scheduled to go to Brussels for a NATO summit later in this month in March. And he also plans to attend the European Council meeting as well. What do you think Germany expects and hopes to achieve in relations with the US in these forums? And I'm talking not only of its sort of bilateral relations and its national interests, but also in the European context where Germany is a leader. Will the war in Ukraine overshadow other important transatlantic issues related to trade, to climate? What's your view on this?
Thanks, Akasemi. It's great to see you. And thank you to Jerome for the warm welcome. And Sören, thank you as well for the invitation today. So I'll start with your last point, Akasemi. I think right now the transatlantic relationship is being dominated by the war in Ukraine. You know, when Biden entered office last year, I think there was a sigh of relief all over Europe that, Biden was in the White House, and he also had a very good team in place to deal with transatlantic relations. And there were some bumps at the beginning. I think there was a lot of criticism about the withdrawal from Afghanistan last summer, as well as the AUKUS deal. So Europeans were a little wary, but now I think there has been a lot of appreciation by the way this administration has been closely coordinating with European partners to deal with Russian aggression. And I think there's a lot of appreciation there. I think Germany and the US have always had a sort of indispensable partnership, as President Obama once called it. But we had seen a shift more recently before the advent of this, before February 24th. We were talking about working on things together like climate change, promoting the idea of democracy, making our democracies more resilient, and of course also confronting autocracies around the world. And that now I think is front and center when you think about the war in Ukraine, because this has shown Europe and the United States that they must stick together to preserve the values that they hold dear for democracy in order to combat Russia, which is trying to change the balance of power, trying to change the European security architecture on the continent. And this also obviously has ramifications for relations with China. And the United States has always been clear that they would like to work on China with a transatlantic context. So I think for now, all those other objectives are also very important, like climate change. But this is going to go hand in hand with what we're dealing with right now. I mean, as Oliver mentioned, Germany is now embarking on a new phase. It will become a true military partner in the transatlantic relationship and within Europe, because it's investing in its military capabilities. And it's also going to undergo an energy transformation. I think this government already wanted to go about having an energy transformation when they came into office late last year. The idea was to be carbon neutral, to be 100% dependent on renewable energy. And now there is a big conundrum for the German economy, because the idea was to depend on natural gas as a bridging option until this economy could go toward renewable energy. And this is a problem right now, and it obviously is very topical right now for Germany's part in having a hard stance against Russia, because they've been party to the sanctions, as Oliver mentioned, but there is some criticism within Europe and within Germany about whether it could stop the valve right now and disassociate itself from Russian gas.
Thank you so much, Sudha. I would like to now ask a question directed to Charles, to our panelist, Charles Huber. And this is related to the broader theme of EU-Africa relations. So with the terrible tragedy and war in Ukraine, as of this week, 2.5 million refugees have fled the Ukraine. And it has been quite astounding how EU member states, such as Poland, for example, that greatly resisted shouldering their burden of taking in refugees in past refugee crises, 2015, the Afghanistan war come to mind, that countries such as Poland that resisted taking on refugees, taking on solidarity, now open their arms and doors to the Ukrainian refugees. Fortunately, we also see that the EU invoked a 2001 directive to allow uprooted people the chance to stay, work, and put their children in school automatically without having to go through the normal EU asylum procedure. Definitely a very positive development for the humanitarian crisis of refugees in Ukraine. And as a last point, we've also seen, unfortunately, African students in the Ukraine who are getting turned away at the border of Ukraine and Poland. What are the implications of this very different EU response to refugees from Ukraine, contrasted with refugees from Africa, from the Middle East. What do you think this poses for EU-Africa relations, Charles?
Yeah, thank you very much for posing me the question. Yeah, definitely this inequality in terms of how refugees from Ukraine to the West were treated, of course, caused a big negative echo in African countries. And the thing is, the fact is that it was declined, that the president of the European Council said it does not exist. It provoked even more the negative perception of the EU and African relation, less within the governments, but definitely within the African population. Due to the last negotiations with the European Union, the EU-African summit, there was no big, how can I say, no big deal made, no big changes in preferences. Africa does not really feel like the countries profit from European partnership agreements, as most of the raw material is a part of the how can I say, the trade balance. And Africa, in terms of working on the issue of migration, means keeping their young people in their countries. They have to develop the economy, and that's was not really an output during that discussion. So I think Africa does know very little about the Ukraine, but there are always this kind of issues, and the issue of racism, what of course provokes the African soul. And the fact that this is neglected and said, I don't know, somebody said the president from the European Council said, the fault was not how the people are treated, the fault was how the Africans by themselves, they behaved. They didn't line up, so it was their fault that they are not, how can I say, they are not treated, or they said they are not treated the way they wanted. On the other hand, referring to the country I'm actually living and working in, Senegal, Ukraine as well tried to recruit illegally, also by violating international law, by recruiting illegally young people to join the forces, the voluntary forces in Ukraine. It caused, of course, a little bit turmoil among the population. And I said, we are poor people. Our guys are poor. Some of them don't even know where the Ukraine is. And then even when they are treated in a bad way in terms of an evacuation, and where people said they have been kept back even, and said, you guys, you don't get on that train or on the bus, you fight for us against Russia. Of course, this is something totally unacceptable, and it cost, I don't want to say an antipathy against Ukraine. Ukraine is far away, and I think here in Africa, where you have to fight for your daily living, for your daily meal, I think is priority number 5, but still it was an issue what was discussed. And in terms of the consequences of this conflict in general, I have the impression that however this conflict and this war ends, we have to think and take other constellations in the geopolitical chessboard into consideration. And you were talking also before about the transatlantic relationship with EU, and I want to make a comment about that. There are 2 focuses and 2, let's call it battlefields, the US has in the focus. It was the South Pacific, and now it's the Ukraine. And it depends how much Europe, and we cannot speak about Germany in a crisis like that. We have to talk about Europe. How much is the focus of Europe on the South Pacific? Except France, in New Caledonia, they have interest in raw material, I don't know if they express it sin, but they control 25% of the European, of the global resources on this matter. How the rest of Europe is interested and has a relation to that issue of the United States and the trade war and the geostrategic operations between China and the US.
Well, thank you, Charles. Thank you very much. Just a reminder to the audience, we will open the floor shortly, so please feel free to post your questions in the chat. So my next question is to Sudha. The new German government has been very cautious to avoid using the term diplomatic boycott regarding the Beijing Olympics. The reluctance of Olaf Scholz to join the diplomatic boycott of other Western nations hardly came as a surprise to many observers. In what areas will we see a continuity of the Merkel-era Germany-China policy, and in what areas do you see a departure from Merkel's mixed legacy on China? Thank you.
Sorry, I just had to find the unmute button there, Sören. So that's a very good question. I think that Olaf Scholz did avoid using the term boycott, but that was also, I guess, a European decision. I know that France also avoided that terminology. But I think at the end of the day, as I mentioned before, the trade dependency, or this whole idea in Germany that has been, that was inaugurated, I guess, with the Social Democrats, or has been a pillar of German foreign and security policy, Wandel durch Handel, change through trade. I think that's been turned on its head right now because of this war. And I think Germany is realizing that it has to be very careful of its dependencies with autocrats, with Russia right now, but people are already thinking here in Berlin about what this means regarding the relationship with China. I mean, there was criticism also about rollout of the 5G network here, for example, with Huawei. And I think that Germany is going to think twice now about engaging in trade with China. This country in the past has always tried to balance commercial interests with its values in foreign policy, as well as its partnership within the EU and the transatlantic relationship. And I think now this has changed, this walking the fine line of promoting exports to the detriment perhaps of its partnerships with other democracies. That equation is now going to change. And I think there will be more of a critical look at China moving forward. And as I said before, I think this has to be closely coordinated with the United States and all EU partners. It's not just Germany. I'm sure there are other countries in the EU that were also looking to have lucrative trading relationships with China, Hungary, for example. So this is something that has to be worked through. But right now, all the focus is on Ukraine here in Berlin.
Let me add something, please, to the relations between China and Germany. I think this is not, don't have to see that in the European context. I think Germany has a very strong economic relation to China, and also parts of the value chain were outsourced to China. And I am a citizen. I was a citizen of Munich. I was born in Munich. Just the automotive sector, BMW, Mercedes, and all that. They make their main profits on the Asian market. And I think just to say now, due to the Ukrainian crisis, we lose this market and the economic relations with China, and we have to coordinate that with the US trade policies. I think that's an illusion. Sorry to say that.
I mean, Charles, you may be right, but I think, and I'm not an economist, but I feel like we're at a stage right now where we're undergoing some deglobalization, and countries are looking at making sure that sensitive industries are protected, and not just because of the Ukraine conflict. I think this discussion started even during COVID, right? I mean, you talk about supply chains. Supply chains were disrupted during the COVID pandemic as well. So I think this is something that we're having two crises back to back, and countries are evaluating what it means to trade with countries that don't share values with them.
But then you don't have to make, how can I say, trade with a lot of countries in the world. I definitely don't agree with you on that issue, that Germany, and especially you should talk to the German Prime Minister, Sören, about that case, because especially Bavaria has strong relations to China. I agree with Russia, but I don't agree with you on China. It's just impossible for Germany just to say China.
The unthinkable is suddenly doable here in Germany after 2 weeks of war. So,
So actually, if I
it's a matter of economy. It's a matter also of the economic stakeholders, and talk that over with VW, talk that over with Mercedes. That will give you the same answer as I did.
You're probably right, but I have a feeling that people in Wolfsburg are definitely thinking about their, how leveraged they are in China right now.
Well, thank you so much for your lively discussion. Actually, I would like to follow up with Oliver about on this question, because he has been silent on that matter, and I would be really interested in the official kind of position of where you see a departure of the Merkel-era Germany-China policy. Oliver, could you maybe elaborate on that?
Thank you, Sören. I haven't really been silent. I've been listening closely to what Sudha and Charles have exchanged, and I agree with many points they made. My point would refer to a quote that Sudha came up with, Wandel durch Handel or Wandel durch Annäherung. That's been a constant in German foreign policy and trade policy for the last decades, and one cannot say that vis-a-vis autocratic systems, and we certainly agree that the Soviet Union was one, and all the other economies and countries belonging to the Eastern Bloc certainly were to be put in the same category, did not bear results or come up with results. But certainly now, and Olaf Scholz chose that word wisely and on purpose, with this watershed moment that we have, with an all-out war that's now a certain threshold that's been trampled over, that's a different thing. China is certainly in a different category. It's a systemic rival, as the EU has now come to dub it. We have reached out. Charles is completely right. There's a lot of German investment in China, especially automotive, but other investments too. And I would not say that these kind of relations, trade relations, have left China completely untouched. But certainly we have come to certain situations in China vis-a-vis the genocide in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs that have also put us into a certain position, a certain spot. Will we continue to tolerate that? And as Sudha mentioned rightly, the 5G Huawei controversy and the supply chain law, the supply chain act that's been stipulated, I think, in 2020, is a reflection of that changed relationship vis-a-vis China, and this importance that a more value-driven, more assertive policy has taken ground, not only in Germany but all over Europe, and that's a new reality. And I think that is something that also China has to deal with, and there are much more. There's much more for them to lose also vis-a-vis the biggest market in the world, the single market, and China's economic interests, which is of course the basis of all their success and their growth and their prosperity they've seen the past the past years. So that's maybe a different kind of relationship, but certainly this watershed moment with the war in Ukraine has put a stark light on how we would like to proceed and how and where our systemic rivals are and what we can do to stand up to this. And certainly, as Olaf Scholz put it, we don't want to go back to 19th century Europe where the big powers just contend and fight over their spheres of influence, but we want to rather preserve or go back because we've already maybe gone to see some countries go steps too far into this rules-based international order that was created after the Second World War. And I think if you look at the last resolution that was taken by the General Assembly of the United Nations, 141 countries condemning this act of aggression by Russia, you see that we're not alone in this. And certainly the European Union has found a new vigor, new grounds to come up with a joint position. And of course, and I agree with Charles on that, there's lots to do for Europe. I mean, we've looked at migratory flows coming over from the Mediterranean, from Northern Africa. We have seen quite recently, before the war, Syrian refugees trying to get to Europe via Belarus. And I think that's another scene or theater where Europe needs to do its homework and come to terms with it. And certainly partnerships with the African states, EU African states, is something also to look at. And certainly Germany, as the current G7 presidency, is trying to push for that. Many of that is going on in the field of climate change, of course, energy partnership with South Africa, helping other countries to also try to get close to carbon neutrality. And some do, and some cases in Africa are quite successfully doing that, but also, of course, economic partnership in the longer term. That is something vitally important, but it all has to happen, of course, on the same basis of rules-based and rule of law-based international order that we've come to work on, and that has become the fabric of our international cooperation. So yes, there is a shift, of course, because this is an unprecedented act, this war that is going on. But certainly there'll be a lot of areas in between, also vis-a-vis China, where trade and where joint projects, investments can also still have a beneficial effect. It's a balancing act, as Sudha rightly said.
Thank you so much, Oliver, and thank you to all the panelists, Charles and Sudha, for that very engaging discussion on questions of trade and its impact on autocracy, particularly in China. I now see that we have a question from the audience following up on this topic. Wouldn't steps against China because of possibly supporting Russia, referring to the sanctions, create a stronger alliance of China with Russia and end up being counterproductive, since China might be interested in publicly distancing itself from Russia? So this is about the dynamic between China and Russia. Perhaps, Oliver, could you follow up with a response to that?
Yes, thank you. Well, that kind of hooks up on the last sentences that I just formulated. It's a balancing act, really, for China as well. China has, of course, geographic interests. It has military interests in the region. Think Taiwan. Think South Pacific, Spratly Islands. Think also maybe political interests with regard to human rights in Hong Kong. But of course, it has huge economic and commercial interests. It needs raw materials. It needs markets to sell their products to. And somehow China has turned into or become the manufacturing powerhouse of the world. It's delivering its good everywhere. So what they need, of course, is markets that are willing to buy and places where they can sell. So they're in a difficult spot there as well. I don't see any. I have difficulty to see what eventually then President Putin is aiming at with regard to Russia and its long-term interest. Complete folly to my understanding. But I can't see any acts of desperation in Beijing being prepared. I think what China always wants is, of course, stability in its markets, and even more in its neighborhoods. So I think they will certainly try to certainly not push for a more conflictive line in their foreign policy. But of course, what in the end the big problem for China is always this internal strifes and domestic pressure when it comes to certain groups and to holding together this whole conglomerate of different cultures and languages and this super big people. That is certainly something that China is concerned with. So peace in the neighborhood, or stability rather in the neighborhood, and the ability to sell onto the market. So I can't really see a big alignment or a big allied push from China's side, although maybe silently something is going on, and certainly China is and will remain for the time being a systemic rival because it's not actually what we call a democracy.
Can I add something here?
Let me add something to
Go ahead, Sudha. I'm sorry,
Okay.
Sudha, go ahead.
Just very quickly, I think Oliver is absolutely correct that China is also kind of performing a juggling act. We remember during the Olympics, Putin and Xi said that they were going to create an alliance with no limits. So I think that set the tone that China was posturing to sort of weaken the U.S., and say that, look, we can stand up to sort of this unipolar world, which they see a different, like as Oliver mentioned, they see more spheres of influence and more of a multipolar world right now. And so I think China might be hedging, right? I mean, they are claiming that Ukraine has its territorial integrity and sovereignty. It should be respected. But at the same time, if we have something at GMF called the Alliance for Securing Democracy that monitors disinformation. And China is also pushing narratives that Russia is pushing about the war in Ukraine. So I think it's trying to do a juggling act and hedging to see if it should, in fact, support Russia and go down that road. But it's probably also wondering, China, whether, is it smart to go down with the sinking ship? Because, right now, Russia might win on the battlefield in Ukraine, but it seems that most agree that it will be very hard for Russia to control Ukraine in the long run.
Okay, Charles, go ahead.
Let me add a little bit an issue concerning the mutual relationship between the West and China. And I want to stress that it's a mutual relationship. And we were talking about the impact of China, but I think if there's an impact on China, there's automatically an impact for the economy of the US and automatically an impact of the economy of the European states and others. I was a part of the delegation visiting China with the former Minister of Economic Affairs, Sigmar Gabriel, and I was the only parliamentarian who accompanied him. And we spoke to Gao Hucheng, the Minister of Economic Affairs, and about the relations. Also I made the proposal, a trilateral relationship, Europe, Germany, and African countries. And he was just smiling. He said, why do we need Germany for handling our businesses in Africa? the humanitarian aspect, that was at the same time, that was, yes, the year of, how can I say, of the anniversary of the Socialist Party of China, Communist Party, and also Sigmar Gabriel. He was holding a speech. He brought up the issue of human rights. I think the human rights will be still, how can I say, sand in the shoes, of the relations to the West. But I really doubt, and when we talk about China relation to Russia, Russia is a military force, but it's a totally different caliber when we talk about China. And I think we have to be aware of that, what I said in the beginning, that a new, how can I say, a new bloc could be built. There are people who are supporting the European side, also in Africa. There are countries which stayed neutral in terms of a resolution against Russia within the United Nations. And so I think we have to have a focus on that, how things like that develop. And Oliver, you said before, a raw material. We have to not to forget that, for example, Russia, China, concerning rare earth, how do we want to implement and establish the electromobility in Europe? We don't have that. There were wrong decisions from the European Union concerning Congo and all that. I think the whole geopolitical and geo-economic scenario is much more complex than human rights. And this is just a part of it. And I think we have to, how can I say, observe the whole development, the relations with China, Russia on all levels, and not just on the human rights, even if it's a valid criticism in terms of Russia, in terms of China, and in terms of other countries.
Thank you, Charles. We are moving to a very different topic now. A question from the chat. The early opinion polls show support for the tougher German policies across much of the electorate. And I think by tougher German policies, military spending and the relation towards Russia is meant. How might Ukraine-related developments affect the mainstream German parties, but also on the flanks like the Die Linke and the AfD? Whoever would like to respond to this question, please feel free to answer.
Oliver, you or me or you? I think, okay, I'll start if.
Yeah, you go ahead, Charles, and I'll follow.
Yeah, right. I think in terms of AfD and the Linke, concerning especially AfD, and that's, how can I say, I'm asking me the question why Putin was not just supporting or just having a strong relation to the Linkspartei, to the left party. Also, I said he supported the AfD. That means the ultra-rights, and he also supported, and that may have irritated also President Biden. He supported all the right-wing movements around the world and was also in a strong connection with the alt-right movement in the United States. So, on the other hand, it is said that neo-Nazis are fighting at the same time in Ukraine, and also Russian neo-Nazis are fighting in the Ukraine. And I don't know if that element really has an impact on the public soul due to the mediatic presence of the Ukraine, of President Zelensky, on all that. I think that really actually does not play a role. There is a big commitment from the whole and big support from all over Europe and from the Western world, including Germany, I think this is not the topic, and that's not going to influence. It doesn't have the capacity. And if you see that this is a war, what has also a lot of mediatic attention due to the how can I say, the social medias. The wars before didn't have that, but that creates empathy, and there's a big empathy for the Ukrainian population, for the Ukrainian president, for the resistance against the Russians, from the courage of the population and all that. But I think these are the key moments, and this is not an issue of a public discussion now and in the future.
Maybe just a quick follow-up from my side, and completely agree with what Charles has said. One of the latest polls I've seen, there was this super big swing from 22% supporting a very assertive posturing in German foreign policy vis-a-vis Russia to 78%. So that for me kind of makes one thing clear. I think the fringes in parliament are completely sidelined at the moment. So there's, as Charles mentioned, there was this proximity, and there still is, between the right-wing AfD and Russian entities and the Russian government. Certainly, we have seen Putin trying to exert this influence in many different countries in the EU. As was mentioned, I lived for 4 years in London. So Brexit, certainly, there's always this notion that there was Russian money going also into that referendum and other places. We've seen what Russia Today and Sputnik have peddled out in the German public, and certainly the Linke, which was at pains, of course, with the Russian Federation and its president, and it's one of its main demands, of course, was for Germany to leave NATO, and some of its representatives like Sarah Wagenknecht still doubting that Vladimir Putin would, after that military buildup, would go to war. They are completely proven wrong. So for the time being, I think neither AfD nor Die Linke will have any noticeable influence or voices to be heard. But again, that may change. Polls are subject to changes. So if there is a big push, an economic push, that if prices go up in Germany, if we see that so much that was announced that we want to do all in parallel, so build up the army, speed up our energy transformation, get out of nuclear within this year. Still there's a little bit of pandemic we have to tackle with. So there's big funds nationally, but also on a European basis to reinvigorate businesses, to make the transfer and to help supply chains replenish. That's a lot on the plate, and inflation was already high before the war. It might become higher, and there's certainly also the social question attached to that. And so polls might change. It might be evening out again, but certainly if you have an outright war and not a long withdrawn conflict, that's maybe different, like we've seen in Afghanistan. But if an outright war at the front doorstep of Germany, then certainly for the time being there's a clear majority, as the polls show, and the fringes are at the moment sidelined and silenced in a way.
Thank you, Sudha. Would you like to add to that as well, or?
Sure. I mean, also very quickly, I think if you see it across the board, not just in Germany, but also Hungary is having national elections next month, as is France. And I think during an emergency situation, the power of the incumbency is quite prevalent. And polls are showing that this current government has the support of the electorate. And the CDU, of course, is also supportive of Chancellor Scholz, and we're applauding to his speech on February 27th in Parliament. So I guess it's just a matter of time. There are some key state elections this year in North Rhine-Westphalia, for example. That will be interesting to watch, because that state is usually a bellwether in German politics, but it might be too soon to give an indication on the national level.
Thank you so much. So as a last question, I want to direct to the panel that draws on elements that have already been discussed, namely Olivier and Charles mentioned some of the internal threats to democratic legitimacy that we see with pro-Putin agitators in the US, in Germany, and other parts of the EU, but then also the question of this current refugee crisis from the Ukraine and for all of Europe. So our audience member wants to know, is there a lively public debate in Germany on this current refugee crises that's linked to issues of race, issues of internal democratic threats, issues of religion, i.e., who is more welcome and who is viewed more critically and why? And Sudha, since you're based in Germany right now, perhaps you could start us off, and then the rest of the panelists can give their input.
Yeah, so after months of talk show hosts being dominated by COVID here in Germany, eventually the theme switched to the war in Ukraine. And there have been articles in the German press about the hypocrisy when dealing with refugees from the Ukraine versus refugees from Afghanistan, Syria, or Africa. So there have been some articles, but I think it would be a stretch to say that there's been a lively debate. Right now, the concern is about the escalation of the conflict, what it means for the eastern flank in NATO, and what it means in terms of cost for the German economy. I think those are the topics that people are talking about here.
Thank you, Sudha. Charles, would you have a perspective?
Yes, of course. I live in the center of migration of West Africa. I live in the region called the Petite Côte in Senegal, close to the city of Mbour. When I was just a little bit more than half a year ago, looking out of my window of the balcony, sometimes I saw boats passing by with over 100 people. And we saw nearly every 3 days a big boat departure Europe, and there was a saying in Wolof, it said, Barça via Barzak. Barzak. It means Barça is Barcelona or dying. It means like Napoli to see or to die is Barça to see and to die. And I have a little gym what I constructed for the youngsters here, that they get rid of their energy, that they stay in good health and everything. And I mean, it's different if you see that not from the distance, if things are so close. And if you hear from guys, which you have had a tea, I always have, how can I say, a little tea table where I invite the youngsters which got nothing to do, who got nothing to do, who are telling me the problems they have here because of this huge unemployment. And then all of a sudden, one of them disappears, and the other one disappears, and you hear they're all dead. And then they send you a link in the internet on Facebook, and now you see the pictures of the guys who said, listen, this guy was just here a couple of days ago, and then they play sad music to that. I think definitely, even if there is in the institutional perspective a difference between a refugee who comes out of a war and a refugee who comes from an economic underdeveloped region of the world like Africa, with the highest poverty rate and the highest rate of unemployment. I think you have to look for a different term for people like that, or talking about illegal immigration, quote. Thing is, people here, some of them, they have a high, how can I say, the academic education. And then they have the education, they get no job. Then they apply for a job outside. They said, Charles, can't you bring me to Germany, or can we do this and this and that? I said, yeah, if you speak German, learn German, then there is the German academic exchange, students exchange service, and inform yourself, or I can help you to do so. So I think now, due to how can I say, the images of suffering people in Ukraine, of course, the Germans, they are not this as stone-hearted that they say, okay, we don't accept the refugees under these circumstances. Definitely, it looks different when you come from an African country, and also because, and that was also a big discussion when I brought some delegations here to Germany to see the president, that people from Africa sometimes are treated in a different way. I think that regarding the EU-African relations, that has to change. The youngsters, meanwhile, say, as they are very well informed how the global economy functions due to the internet, if even those who are not, didn't study or have any academic education, they say, you don't just take away our raw material, you also take away our work, because we have no value chain. No value chains here. You transport the material to Europe and then you bring it back fabricated, and we buy them to the double price in Europe. I think also in these trade relations between Europe and Africa, something has to change dramatically. Otherwise, if you complain about the refugees from Africa, I think it's not valid to complain about that. It's a part of the system of the economic relations with Africa, and this definitely you have to change.
Maybe
so
just
much,
a quick
Charles.
follow-up.
Yes, please, Oliver. Yes,
if I can. I agree with you both, Sudha, with your assessment on the public debate. I think it's all covered at the moment. There's a great outpour within the German public to help to reach out. Although in some places there's already, the system seems to be stretched out again. There's some attempt to exploit this kind of refugee crisis from the right wings when they say, well, these are European refugees, so we have no problem with that. And also maybe some distortions or some alienation processes taking place when it comes to how to go about Russian groups living in Germany. But I think overall there's no comparison with the migration crisis we had in 2015. And of course, if you look at that and Germany's history, the Federal Republic of Germany's history, when it comes to immigration to Germany, it all comes in big jumps and hoops. And certainly 2015 has taught some to the German public that although Chancellor Merkel said, wir schaffen das, we can do it. She was heavily criticized, but in the end, we kind of did. We managed, right? We got by. And then, of course, there's a certain level of preparation now with the inflow of Ukrainian refugees. I completely agree with Charles when it comes to trade relations and trade flows between Africa and Europe and African countries in Germany. We have to take a close look, really. We're trying also to do that within the G7 and G20, how to come to a more equitable exchange. And certainly, maybe as the last point, and it's maybe not a secret that Germany is an aging society and will be in dire need of workforce in the years to come, because we will remain a manufacturing industry or economy in the long run. So that is something that also comes into the picture without me commenting on that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Oliver, for these final remarks, and thank you to everybody on the panel, also to Charles and Sudha for your insightful comments. I think we covered a lot on new foreign policy of the new German government. Thank you also to Akasemi for co-moderating, and Jeroen for the kind words of introduction. And I think we will meet again soon for another event. It's my pleasure to wish you a wonderful day. It's sunny here outside in California, so hopefully it's sunny as well in Berlin and in Senegal.
I have sunshine all day long, every day.
See?